Inside the trial tower's surveillance room, at the very top of the tower, several examiners wore expressions of astonishment. At this very moment, an elderly man in robe walked into the room. This was Elder Ning. The examiners immediately bowed in greeting to the elder. Elder Ning heard there was a unique profession and wanted to witness him in action. On the screen was the live footage of Lin. The examiners quickly relayed the events that had just transpired. They were preparing to increase the difficulty level, conducting the second test based on the legendary difficulty. However, one of the examiners raised an objection, feeling that this wasn't fair to Lin. Elder Ning chuckled, saying, "In the past, there have been professionals who have slain monsters instantly as well. For this test, they will deem Lin as the top scorer with, and reward him the initial 100 points. If Lin passes the second test, they'll grant an additional 1,000 points." Elder Ning was prepared to provide these points from his own pocket. After waiting for a short while, another monster materialized before Lin. The announcer once again instructed Lin to prepare for the second test. The rule was simple: defeat the monster before him. Despite this being the second test, Lin didn't find it strange. He believed this was just the normal rule of the trial. As the countdown ended, he once again unleashed his soul flame. The mage monster before him let out a harrowing scream and was instantly obliterated. Another instant kill. The examiners all turned to look at Elder Ning simultaneously. Elder Ning simply smiled, telling them to proceed with the second round of the examination. As the first round test concluded, the authoritative voice echoed in the ears of all the examinees, informing them that out of over 10,000 combat class students, only half had passed the first round. The scores were then announced. Without a doubt, Lin was in first place. A girl named May was second, while Charlotte ranked third. Richard from the Dynasty Guild secured fourth place with a time of 5.5 seconds. Upon seeing these rankings, Richard's anger reached its peak. He couldn't believe he hadn't even made it into the top 3. Glancing at Lin's 0.1 second score, he was convinced there had been a system error. That voice resounded once more, announcing the starting of second round of the examination. The voice emphasized the potential dangers of this round. There might be casualties, and all candidates must judge their abilities wisely. If they face danger, they may withdraw during the test. The second round was structured like a dungeon raid, divided into 3 difficulty levels: normal, nightmare, and hell, with different points awarded for each level. Lin quickly discovered that the goal of the second round was to see who could slay the most monsters within 30 minutes. Without a second thought, Richard chose the hell difficulty. In his eyes, killing a monster in hell difficulty was equivalent to defeating 5 in the normal difficulty. He summoned his weapon, revealing his class as a berserker. Charlotte pondered for a moment and decided on the normal difficulty. As an elemental mage, she wasn't adept at close combat, so she aimed to win by quantity over quality. Inside the surveillance room, the examiners were commenting on each candidate's choices. May, who was in second place and also was a shadow hunter, which was a rare assassin-type class, also opted for hell difficulty. By now, most of the noteworthy candidates had made their choices, with only Lin remaining. Every examiner was eager to witness Lin's choice and his performance. After hearing the rules, Lin formed his own judgment. This was a test on individuals' stamina. Engaging in continuous combat for 30 minutes would strain any class, though Lin felt he was an exception. Lin chose hell difficulty. Outside the examination area, all the school principals from province had gathered. Every principal looked on enviously at Principal Liu. Principal Liu was visibly ecstatic after seeing Lin's performance. Once all the candidates had made their selections and the countdown ended, the second round of the examination began. In an instant, Lin was transported into a separate space. A beast clad in armor emerged from the ground, letting out an enraged roar. It was an elite orc warrior, with all its attributes in triple digits. Lin glanced at its seemingly pitiful stats, shaking his head, feeling it was too weak. It was much weaker than the nightmare-class mobs from the Western Sea Mine dungeon. He also understood that this was just a test. If the monsters were too strong, there would be a large-scale elimination. Lin summoned 2 skeletal warriors, each with an impressive 4 stats, all 2,500. They charged towards the pitiable elite orc warrior and killed it in less than 1 second. After each monster was defeated, it took 5 seconds for another to spawn. The examiners in the monitoring room were left dumbfounded. They couldn't believe that Lin's summoned creatures were so powerful, and that he had 2 of them. After witnessing several of these instant kills, the examiners had grown numb to the sight. Monsters would spawn and die in an instant. The examiners no longer wanted to watch, turning their attention to the other participants. Richard, with redness in his eyes, activated his berserk mode, swung his massive sword non-stop. Charlotte held her staff, casting large fireball spells. Turning attention back to Lin, he was seen comfortably settled in a corner, eating a sweet potato which he pulled out from his pocket. Some examiners noted this down, while others eyed Lin's sweet potato, feeling a pang of hunger. Elder Ning had been silent since the beginning of this round, watching Lin intently. He was deeply intrigued by Lin. As the 30 minutes quickly elapsed and the test concluded, Richard, panting heavily, slumped to the ground. He had defeated 50 monsters and believed he was in the lead. After half of the participants were eliminated in the first round, another half dropped out in the second round, either due to failure or voluntary withdrawal. Eagerly awaiting the results, Richard's anticipation peaked when the scores were announced. To his astonishment, he ranked fourth once again, while Lin had scored a staggering 1605 points. Jumping to his feet, he quickly calculated in his head. In the hell difficulty, each monster was worth 5 points, so the maximum points one could earn in a minute was 60, making the limit for 30 minutes 1,800 points. With a score like Lin's, it meant he had killed 301 monsters, and he would have killed all of the monster instantly. This was impossible. Outside the examination hall, Principal Liu trembled uncontrollably, his cup quaking in his hand, spilling its contents. Even in the past, where the two prodigy from their province, Su Qianxing and Lin Mohan, had only scored 700 and 650 points respectively. Principal Liu was at a loss for words. Soon, the third round of the examination began. This time, the candidates would face a boss-level monster. There were also 3 levels of difficulty. Without giving it a second thought, Lin opted for the hell difficulty. He was up against the boss-level orc captain. Observing the monster's stats, Lin felt it was somewhat underwhelming. Even though it was the hell difficulty, the boss seemed to have been significantly weakened. He also realized that it would be unlikely for the examination to present a genuine hell-level boss, as it would inevitably lead to student casualties. The same location, the same format, but a different opponent. Lin once again summoned 2 skeletal warriors. Feeling a tinge of disappointment, he found the test too simple. Richard engaged the boss head-on, recklessly clashing with it. Charlotte, on the other hand, continuously dodged the orc captain's attacks while retaliating with her fireball. Mei utilized a stealth ability, positioning herself behind the boss, waiting for the right moment to strike. Back to Lin, his 2 skeletal warriors unleashed a rampage strike. Their weapons glowed red, and with a strike from each, they finished off the boss with ease. The examiners engaged in discussion, realizing they still hadn't gauged Lin's true strength. They could only wait for the 5th round of tests. Some believed that the 5th round would surely reveal his genuine capabilities. Listening to the examiners' discussions, Elder Ning simply kept stroking his beard, with most of his attention focused on Lin. The results were once again displayed. Unsurprisingly, Lin remained in the top position. He quickly scanned for Gao Yang's position. Although he was only ranked 670th, the score was still commendable. Lin was delighted to see that Gao Yang was not eliminated. The 4th round of the examination started shortly after. The voice of the examiner echoed once more, informing the candidates that the difficulty of this test would increase further. They were given the option to withdraw. With their current scores, admission into a top 100 academy in the kingdom was already assured. Yet no one chose to bow out. A golden light shone down, enveloping everyone, restoring them to their peak condition. The rules of the examination were that each candidate would face 10 waves of monster attacks, with each wave consisting of 10 monsters, amounting to a total of 100 monsters. There would be a 1-minute interval between each wave, and they would continuously appearing. The final wave would be led by a boss-level monster. Shortly after, the first wave of monsters appeared before the examinees. Several examiners were intently watching Lin from the monitoring room, curious about how he would handle the situation this time. Elder Ning just smiled, saying this challenge wouldn't faze him either. Before their eyes, Lin summoned yet another skeletal warriors, while clutching the soul flames in his hands. The 4th round of exams officially began. Lin summoned an extra skeleton warrior and, paired with soul flame, effortlessly defeated all the monsters in the first batch. The examiners were shocked to see Lin was able to summon another skeletal warrior. Some of them were furious because Lin hadn't summoned it from the start and had been hiding it. Elder Ning had an "I knew it'll" look on his face. Lin yawned, feeling that this so-called entrance exam lacked challenge. It was far less exciting than his first time entering the Western Sea Mine dungeon. He found another spot to sit and began eating his sweet potatoes. The examiners grew more and more annoyed and decided to observe others first. Charlotte was using AoE skills to hold off and gradually wear down the monsters, while Richard maintained his bold and broad combat style. A giant 2-handed sword danced in the air, producing a whooshing sound, swung in all directions. Watching Lin was extremely boring because there were never actions. Wave after wave, most of the candidates gave up. They couldn't keep up with the overwhelming number of monsters which later trapped them. They were teleported outside the trial tower one after another. Watching the live broadcast, Gao Yang was incredibly excited. Gao Yang persisted until the 6th wave before choosing to give up. Outside, he told the other candidates about how Lin had taken him to solo a nightmare-level dungeon. He spoke incessantly, but no one believed him, thinking that Gao Yang was speaking nonsense. As more and more students were eliminated, only 5 remained. These were the top 4 from before, along with a level 15 paladin from a prestigious family. He was well versed in the examination rules. Since he knew the last 2 rounds of the examination were crucial for scoring points, he had laid low up to this point and began to make his move now. Richard let out a roar and activated his Mayhem Berserker skill. This ability could boost a berserker's strength and health by 5 times for 5 minutes, but would reduce agility. After the skill wears off, there would be a 30-minute period of fatigue. In his berserk state, Richard went on a monster-slaying spree. Lin waited for a minute, and finally, the last wave of monsters spawned. But there was no difference from the previous waves. Under the gang-banging of the skeleton warriors, the boss fell. The 4th round ended with only 5 students passing. The examiner's voice echoed throughout, reaching the ears of everyone, both inside and outside the tower. When the rankings were announced, there was no change. Seeing that only 5 had passed the 4th round, the eliminated students could hardly imagine the difficulty of the last test. Richard, already weakened from the after effects of his skill, struggled to stand, leaning heavily on his greatsword. Charlotte took a deep breath, thinking, with a top 5 rank, she should be able to enter Xiajing Academy. Mei looked solemn. Her eyes were set on the Xiajing Academy. The examiner's voice rang out again. He could see that everyone had the same goal, but he told the remaining 5 that getting into Xiajing Academy wasn't easy. There was still one final test, and if their performance wasn't up to par, they'd be eliminated just the same. Next, the examiner began explaining the rules for the last test, and the 5 remaining students listened attentively. They would be teleported to a battling realm where a never-ending stream of various monsters would spawn. Not only they were vast in numbers, but they also included elites, leaders, and even boss-level monsters. The faster they kill, the quicker the monsters would respawn. As time progressed, the difficulty would increase, and with higher difficulty came higher points. Unlike before, there would be no live broadcast from this realm, and nobody could see what was happening inside. Examiners could only see the point changes. After explaining, the 5 were teleported into the battling realm. The scoring rules appeared in front of each person. There were 5 stages, and with each stage, the monster level would increase by 1, while the points for killing a mob would double. The landscape was vast, resembling a huge plain. The ground was pitch black and reeked of blood. There were countless rugged stones, some of which were several meters high. Lin could feel that an unimaginable great battle had once taken place here. The sound of footsteps rang out, and a group of monsters came into view. They had already spotted Lin. The monsters roared in unison and charged toward him. Level 15 lizard man warriors. Lin noticed that he couldn't discern the monsters' attributes and could only see their levels. The roars echoed through the battle space, drawing the attention of other lizard men. As they entered Lin's line of sight, the 3 skeleton warriors beside him sprang into action, rushing at the lizard men. With a swing of their swords, they surprisingly didn't deliver an instant kill. A sliver of health remained, which caught Lin slightly off guard. The lizard men must have a high HP, but their counterattack didn't deal much damage to the skeleton warriors, indicating they had low damage and strength. The second strike slashed at the lizard man, successfully finishing him off. The skeleton warrior tossed the corpse of the lizard man toward the group charging at Lin. Lin utilized his corpse explosion skill, and in an instant, in the monitoring room, the examiners noticed Lin's points suddenly jump by 500. They exchanged puzzled looks, wondering what had just happened. Lin then remained stationary, waiting for the remaining lizard men. He intended to use the same tactic again, but the next second, Lin was taken aback to find that the corpses had disappeared. The corpses seemed to have sunk into the pitch-black earth, vanishing from sight. The duration the corpses remained was extremely short, lasting no more than 10 seconds. This forced him to change his strategy. He summoned even more skeleton warriors, using them to lure the rest of the lizard men together. Just like kiting mobs in video games, he gradually clustered them. Nearly 100 lizard man warriors had gathered together. A skeleton warrior killed the nearest lizard man, then a thunderous boom erupted. Lin used his corpse explosion skill multiple times. The dark ground shook incessantly. All of the lizard man warriors were annihilated. Lin's points also shot up to 8,605 points, which even made Elder Ning completely speechless. Seeing Lin's points skyrocketed, he couldn't fathom what Lin had done inside to instantly kill hundreds of monsters. Lin patiently waited for the second wave of monsters to appear. He thought he would have to wait for a while, but suddenly, the sky turned a bright red. Dozens of fireballs, each with a diameter of about a meter, plummeted down like meteorites. He didn't have the time to dodge, so he ordered the skeleton warriors to leap into the air, stacking on top of one another to form a shield-like defense. The meteor-like fireballs slammed into the skeleton warriors, causing sparks to explode in every direction. Fortunately, they didn't hit Lin directly. Although he had a damage transfer skill in place, Lin's own defense and HP were quite low. Transferring the damage might have resulted in the total annihilation of his skeleton warriors. Standing behind the skeletal defense line, Lin's gaze fixed on the approaching horde of creatures. On a higher platform, a group of level 16 lizardman mages wielded their staffs, launching a rain of fire attacks. These creatures had appeared silently, without any prior indication. Lin gazed towards the new group of monsters, and a slight grin appeared on his face.